Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today, putting a bow on the Timberwolves' big preseason opening win over the New Orleans Pelicans on Monday, plus a look at the NBA.com GM survey. That's an annual exercise among all 30 GMs in the league. There were several Timberwolves mentions in this year's survey. Where were they mentioned? Why? Who are they up against in each of these different categories? We're going to talk about it all today on the show. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked on Wolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. I'm also the editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. A reminder, thank you, I guess, first of all, for making Locked on Wolves your first listen every single day. Remember, Locked on Wolves is free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube, as well as Apple, Google, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked on T-Wolves. That's at Locked on T-Wolves. Don't forget the T. And at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, today on the show, I want to wrap up the preseason opener from Monday with a couple of quick hitting good and bad things from Monday's game. I did kind of a more comprehensive breakdown of the game on Tuesday if you want to go back and listen to that. But I want to hit the high points real quickly here. And the things that have kind of been talked about here in the wake of Monday night's game, some of the things that came out after practice on Tuesday as well, some of the quotes that are out there. And then I want to get into the NBA GM survey. There's a lot to talk about here. This is an annual exercise. The Timberwolves have kind of been on the fringes of it, I would say, over the past couple of years. They really haven't been nearly as often mentioned in that exercise as they had been in previous years, right? All the excitement around Andrew Wiggins, and then it was Karl-Anthony Towns and the Jimmy Butler year, of course, and all these years where they were kind of in the conversation as an exciting up-and-coming team. In the last couple of years, they haven't been included hardly at all. This year's an exception. This year, they're back in the conversation in the survey, kind of more still on the fringes of the survey, but there are several mentions of the Wolves. So I want to go through those and see where the GMs got it right, where they got it wrong. That'll all be on today's show. All right, first, let's put a bow on Monday night's preseason victory over the Pelicans. Again, I did studs and duds. The whole postgame pod posted late Monday and into Tuesday. So go back and listen to that if you did miss the game. I go through basically everything that happened, the studs, the duds, the key takeaways, etc. Sleeping on this, a day plus afterwards, looking at the good and the bad from it, still the good that everybody's talking about on social media, that's the defense. The Timberwolves competed defensively. D'Angelo Russell competed defensively. Anthony Edwards was the headliner in terms of splash plays, right? He had two big steals, getting in the passing lane, and then two breakaway dunks that were led to directly from that. He had the one block where he recovered, got a baseline block. Him and Jared Vanderbilt teamed up on that play to get a block on the Pelicans. But overall, the effort defensively was what was so impressive from the Timberwolves. Towns was solid. Jared Vanderbilt was his typical active self. We even saw, I mentioned Russell get in on the act. Patrick Beverley was what we expected. Josh Okogie looked more like the Josh Okogie of 2 years ago than the Josh Okogie of last year. And it's partly concept, right? With the much talked about adjustment to pick and roll coverage instead of drop coverage, playing at the level now this year. And that's something that the Wolves are doing. And we've seen it now for one game. It was successful. And there was some post practice comments on Tuesday from a few of the players. Jared Vanderbilt talked about the similarities between the Timberwolves' new pick and roll coverage to what he did in Denver and what the Nuggets do with Nikola Jokic, and how playing at the level, it really allows the back end of the defense to fly around and be active. It forces them to fly around and be active instead of just kind of hanging back. And I believe the way that Vando put it, this is a quote transcribed by Dane Moore on Twitter. He says you could hide in the previous version of defense in the drop coverage. You could kind of hide in that scheme. You can't do that anymore. And that is exciting for Timberwolves fans. And it really puts the onus on the back end of the defense, whether that's Towns, Vanderbilt, Naz Reid, Jaden McDaniels at times, although I think he'll often be a point of attack of defender on the perimeter. This is a different looking defense. And at least for one night, at least for the preseason opener, and yes, it's preseason. Yes, it was a Zion Williamson-less Pelicans team. It looked good. Also, the offense, for the most part, looked pretty good too. The shooting wasn't outstanding. They shot like 34% from outside the arc. Beasley and Edwards, especially, both struggled with their jumpers. But Towns was, I think, 2 of 4, and D'Lo was 3 of 5 outside the arc. For the most part, the offense flowed well. They didn't run a lot of the horn sets that we came accustomed to seeing last year, but they were trying a few different things. Nothing too exotic, and Finch isn't going to run much that's exotic. He's going to run read and react type sets instead of a Ryan Saunders or his father, Flip Saunders, an intricate half court set. It's going to be more, hey, here are the bones of this thing. We want you guys to read and react and trust your instincts, basically. And we saw that. Certainly, this was a shell offense, basically, that we saw on Monday night, but it worked well. And Malik Beasley was, even though he didn't shoot the ball great, he had a couple of nice passes. He scored in the paint. D'Angelo Russell was drawing fouls. Similarly to how active they were on defense, they were looking to push the ball in transition on offense and scored fairly well in the half court, despite some of the outside shooting struggles from some of their, generally their better shooters in Beasley and I guess Edwards as well. The only thing that you'd really take away from this game, outside of the occasional 3-point struggle, was that was on the negative side, would be rebounding. And we saw that especially late in the first quarter, when the Pelicans actually took a lead and were leading the game heading out of the first quarter into the second quarter on Monday night. And that lineup really struggled until Jared Vanderbilt came into the game. He kind of injected some energy into the Timberwolves, and they rebounded the ball much better. And we saw this team compete on the glass then for much of the rest of the game. Once basically the third string was in the fourth quarter, some of that advantage kind of was whittled away. The Wolves ended up being a -4 on the glass in this game, in a game that they won by just one possession, but they led by 20 plus for a good chunk of the game and were up double digits for the majority of the game. And rebounding continues to be the thing that they really need to work on as a team. And Vanderbilt playing more is going to help that. McDaniels playing at the 3 instead of the 4 is going to help that. And Anthony Edwards getting literally being 2 inches taller than he was a year ago and being more active, hopefully, on the glass is going to help. Patrick Beverley is a solid rebounding point guard as well. I do think that's an area the Wolves will improve this year, but that is something that really isn't talked about quite enough with the Wolves. I think that's just as big of an issue as point of attack defense right now for the Timberwolves. And they probably have mostly solved it. And I know I'm talking about one preseason game, but also you just look at the personnel. Althea Okogie, Patrick Beverley, add Leandro Balmaro to the mix. And the Wolves have more perimeter point of attack defenders now than they did a year ago. The rebounding is going to be the big question mark. And the overarching theme that I've talked about now consistently the past few days here on the show is the Timberwolves depth is so much better. When you're talking about Balmaro as an 11th man, Torian Prince, Josh Okogie, those guys fighting for the 9th spot in the rotation, basically, 8th spot maybe. I mean, this is a deep team. Jake Layman's your 12th or 13th guy, and he was supposed to be like a borderline starter for this team 2 years ago. And it was a role he never should have been cast in. And it spoke a lot to the dearth of talent on the roster a couple of years ago. Treveon Graham was a starter, for goodness sake. This roster is far deeper than it has been in recent memory. And that was obvious, again, even in a preseason game on Monday. So at any rate, I want to get into, I'll hit a couple quotes here in a second, just really wrapping this thing up, from Monday after practice on Tuesday that are out on social media that I thought were eye-opening. So we're going to do that here next, and then get into the annual GM survey at NBA.com. And there's a lot to talk about here. And we may dive into some of it later still this week, because there's really a lot to digest, when it comes to this survey. First, though, let's talk about sweat block. Hey, guys, there's a few things in life that simply are not fun to talk about. One of them is excessive sweating. You know exactly what I'm talking about. When you sweat through your shirt for no reason, it's definitely embarrassing. And, whether it's public speaking, it might not be life or death, but it certainly seems like it in the moment. It could be an important speech, an interview, it could be a first date. But you can get rid of all those issues with Sweat Block antiperspirant wipes. Sweat Block is stronger and more effective than most clinical antiperspirants. You simply apply it at night before bedtime. Go to bed. The next morning, you wake up, wash, go about your day, and don't worry about sweat. Guaranteed. I know it sounds too good to be true, but you literally only have to use Sweat Block once or twice a week. It keeps you dry the entire time. I tried this. It's awesome. It works 100%. No more pitting out. No more picking your shirt based on which one will hide sweat better. Sweat Block wipes are doctor created and doctor recommended. They work for up to 7 days per use. And there's a dry shirt guarantee. If Sweat Block doesn't keep you dry, you get your money back. This has been featured and tested on the Rachel Ray Show by firefighters, so you know it works. It's been a bestseller on Amazon for the past 10 years, has over 13,000 reviews, and get this, it is still the #1 ranked antiperspirant in Amazon's antiperspirant category. You can wear whatever you want to wear. It'll be your little secret to confidence. It's a must-have for everyone's toiletry bag, whether it's a big presentation, a hot date, an interview, a speech, whatever it might be. You got to use Sweat Block antiperspirant wipes. If you or someone you love is dealing with this, you have to check out Sweat Block. Get it today for 20% off at sweatblock.com with the promo code Locked On. You can also grab it at Amazon or CVS, but instead go to sweatblock.com, use that promo code Locked On, and you'll get 20% off your order. Let's also talk about our friends over at Sleeper. It's about to be fantasy basketball season, and that means you got to get caught up to speed on Sleeper. In 2018, the fantasy sports experts at Sleeper realized that fantasy basketball was broken. Games were being won and lost based on whose players had more scheduled games that week. It made no sense at all and required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's called Game Pick, and it's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count towards their team's total score, ensuring an even number of games played between opponents. The days of losing because your opponent's players simply had more scheduled games to play in that week are over. The days of mindless daily busy work are also over, and the days of giving up halfway through the season because of said busy work definitely also over. In Game Picks, you pick one game per week for each player based on player matchups, home versus away, opponent's defensive ranking, pace of play, and more. All that adds up to more strategy and less busy work. Whether you prefer redraft, keeper, or dynasty, Game Picks has you covered. Sleeper cracked the fantasy basketball code. If you play fantasy football, which I do, by the way, and I play our dynasty league is through Sleeper, if you prefer building out a weekly strategy versus daily busy work, you're going to love Game Picks. Download the Sleeper app, start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed. All right, one more thank you, by the way, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Remember, it's available on all platforms, including YouTube now, so be sure you're subscribed. And thanks for listening. All right, let's put the final bow. This is the most we'll ever talk about a preseason game, I promise. But, I mean, we got to take the good ones when we can, right? Putting a bow on Monday's game, there was a couple good quotes. Patrick Beverley spoke to the media for a while and talked quite a bit about D'Angelo Russell and the skill level that he has, similar to James Harden, Kyrie Irving, in terms of his ability to get to the free throw line, ability to use his handle to get himself open to get free up teammates for shots. He also said he talked about how dominant they were in the first half. He spoke about scoring 40 points in the second quarter, the Pelicans scoring 17. He says he doesn't give an F if it's preseason or not. You just don't turn that on and off. Obviously very impressed with his new team here after the first preseason game. So I thought it was humorous. And also, Pepe speaks his mind. It's good to see him, pumping up his teammates a little bit. Talked a little bit about Vanderbilt and what he said about the defensive scheme as well. So anyway, lots of good stuff. The next preseason game is not until Friday. And the rest of the preseason is actually on the road for the Timberwolves. So the next home game will be the home opener here in a couple of weeks. So anyway, we'll cover the preseason games here throughout the next couple of weeks. Per usual, we'll do post-game pods as we always do. Right now, though, let's go ahead and get into this NBA.com general manager survey. If you're not familiar, it's, of course, at NBA.com. It's an annual exercise that NBA.com does. They interview the general managers of all 30 teams, and they ask them a survey full of questions about the upcoming season. And GMs are not allowed to vote for their own players or personnel. And so this is supposed to be kind of an unfiltered look at who GMs think the player to build around is, who the best young talent is, who the up and coming teams are, the best and worst offseason moves. I guess not worst. The best offseason moves, best coaches, etc. Famously, Karl-Anthony Towns, I think 5 or 6 years ago now, was picked the player that GMs would most want to build around over guys like Anthony Davis, etc. Of course, Anthony Davis he's now second fiddle is not the right way to put it, because he's still a top 8 player in the league, but he's the second best player on his team, and he did win a championship. But Karl-Anthony Towns is the Wolves are still trying to build a team around him. And obviously he's only made the playoffs once since that came out in the survey a few years ago. So I'm only going to highlight where the Timberwolves are mentioned, and there were 7 different areas where the Wolves were mentioned in this survey. The first one, if we're just going down the list, well, actually, no, let's do it this way. I'm going to kind of group these so we're not just jumping back and forth, because there are some similarities through these categories. So let's do it this way. Let's talk first about the promising young up and coming core. And this is kind of the lens through which the Wolves were often mentioned in the NBA.com GM surveys, because it's always been, hey, there's Andrew Wiggins, and hey, there's Towns, and before that it was Love and Rubio, and I don't have to tell you as a Timberwolves fan, as a listener or viewer of this podcast, that there's always kind of this hope that the Timberwolves can sell, and the league as a whole has mostly kind of, bought in at times. And now, strangely enough, after a couple of years where they really weren't mentioned at all in this survey, it kind of feels like we're there again, right? And GMs in the league as a whole is starting to recognize that, hey, this team is actually pretty good if they can stay healthy. So the Timberwolves are in the category on here that's called which team has the most promising young core. The Timberwolves did make this category. I'm going to pull up the exact number here. And they were listed as an other team receiving votes, which I thought was interesting. So number one was the Atlanta Hawks with 50% of the vote. Number two is the Rockets with 10%. And then the Celtics, Grizzlies, Pelicans, and Suns all had 7%. Other receiving votes, which presumably means they each got one vote, was Charlotte, Denver, Detroit, and Minnesota. So they were one of, 10 teams that were mentioned as having the most promising young core, and they received just the single vote. The other place that's related to this, where they were mentioned, is which team will be most improved in 2021, 2022. Here, there were 13 teams mentioned. No surprise, because it's a very, there's a lot of ways you could take this, right? So, for instance, the number one team in this category is the Bulls at 27%. They obviously got DeMar DeRozan. They made some other big moves, and it makes sense why they'd be improved, right? Number two, though, is the Warriors and Lakers tied at second for 13% of the vote. Now, both of those teams are presumably going to be better because they're going to get veteran players back from injury. In the case of the Warriors, a fully healthy Steph Curry, Klay Thompson. For the Lakers, of course, it's LeBron getting fully healthy, Anthony Davis getting fully healthy, and those are the biggest reasons. Then after that, it's Charlotte, New Orleans, Toronto, all up and coming teams. And then under also receiving votes, again, Dallas, Houston, Memphis, Miami, Minnesota, Sacramento, and Washington. I don't know why Sacramento's on this list. I will just continue to drag them, I guess, because I just think they're going to be the third worst team in the West pretty clearly. Memphis, I guess, by virtue of Jaren Jackson Jr. being healthy would be the biggest reason. I don't know how Houston's going to be that much improved on last year. Obviously, they've got a nice young core that they're building, but I don't know how they're going to be that much. I guess they were bad enough last year. That's the argument. Washington, I guess, simply by making the moves they made, but nobody's really talking about them as a seriously improved team necessarily this year. So Minnesota, I think it makes sense why they're grouped in there. And interesting that they're included in both of those categories. I thought that was notable. The other, I guess there's really three ways we can break this out. The second one is let's talk about a couple of new members of the Timberwolves organization. I'm fudging this a little because Chris Finch is one, and obviously he's been with the team since late February last year. But he was listed under others receiving votes. And I said the Wolves are on the fringes of the survey. I'm not lying. There's a lot of other receiving votes here. As in the category, which coach runs the best offense? And this was also fascinating because there were only, 9 coaches, maybe 10 coaches mentioned. So Quinn Snyder, Steve Kerr, Mike Budenholzer, Steve Nash are the top 4. Tied for 5th are Eric Spoelstra and the Heat, Monty Williams of the Suns. And those are all, playoff teams, obviously. Nash should be the only one that's not been a coach forever. Monty Williams taking the Suns to the finals. Quinn Snyder, year in and year out, having an outstanding offense in Utah. And Steve Kerr is Steve Kerr, right? Milwaukee, obviously, winning the championship last year. So that all makes sense. There's only 3 coaches under others receiving votes. So 9 total coaches are mentioned. That's Rick Carlisle, who, of course, is in his first season back with Indiana, Chris Finch, and Michael Malone of the Nuggets. Finch, of course, coached under Mike Malone in Denver a few years ago. So I think that's interesting that they both landed under the also receiving votes. And of these 9 guys, the only one who has Finch has by far the least amount of experience. He's only coached 36 games at the NBA level as a head coach. Steve Nash has the least overall experience on a bench because he had 1 season as a head coach last year, had not previously been an assistant coach for any length of time. And yet he's 4th on this list. And people don't, the Nets, I'm not going to get into this too much, but the Nets have Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. They're going to do a lot of isolation type stuff. And obviously they do creative things. They get Joe Harris shots. But him being 4th is interesting to me. He's the only coach on this list who has only coached in 1 previous season, in addition to Finch. So that's a lot of respect for Chris Finch. And it underscores just how well respected Finch is among his NBA peers as an offensive guru type guy, right? Somebody who was seen as one of the up and coming next head coaches and has been interviewed for countless jobs over the past several years. And sure enough, here he is in the top 9 coaches in terms of the coaches who run the best offense. So it was good to see him get his due on this list. And then the other newcomer mentioned, this one was a little bit of a surprise to me, was Patrick Beverley. He was listed under the category best perimeter defender in the NBA, one of only 7 players in the entire league to receive a vote for best perimeter defender. Of course, Drew Holiday of the Bucks got 50% of the vote, so far and away the winner. Ben Simmons, notably number 2, Jimmy Butler, former Timberwolf, of course, tied with 3rd for Kawhi Leonard of the Clippers, who will miss the season. Giannis is 5th, which is interesting. And then the only other players receiving votes are Marcus Smart of the Celtics and Patrick Beverley of your Minnesota Timberwolves. He's an elite perimeter defender, and we could talk about, size and also age now and injury, issues with him over the past several years are reasons why you could argue against him being a truly elite perimeter defender. And he's not going to guard very many threes, right? He can, though. He can with some level of effectiveness, but putting him in the top, this effectively makes him a top 7 perimeter defender in the NBA, according to GMs. And it's hard to argue with that. If you've never watched Patrick Beverley play and you watched the game on Monday, you would not argue with this. Of course, you'd also probably put Josh Okogie and maybe even Anthony Edwards in this category if you just based it off one preseason game, and that would be a mistake. But it's speaks volumes about Beverley's reputation among NBA front offices that he made this list at all at his age, and he's the only. I guess Drew Holiday would be the other point guard on this list, right? Effectively, and obviously they both play off the ball quite a bit, but it's just incredible that he made this list along with big players like Simmons, Giannis, Leonard. Great to see Pat Bev on this list, and I think he's going to make a huge difference for this Timberwolves team this year. Next, I want to talk about, of course, Anthony Edwards, and there is a Karl-Anthony Towns mention on this survey, believe it or not. So I want to get into all that next. First, though, let's talk about our great friends over at betonline.ag. We're back and better than ever. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back on for another football season. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, even more odds, props, and contests, BetOnline continues to be the number one source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. And don't forget to use that promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From football to basketball, boxing, right on down to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. Again, that's a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Don't forget that promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. All right, let's finish up talking about this GM survey. The Anthony Edwards mentions there's a couple spots that he's listed in. One is which player is the most athletic, and not really surprised he's on this list. He makes it to number 3. Zion Williamson of the Pelicans is number 1 at 27% of the vote. Giannis of the Bucks, number 2 at 20%. Anthony Edwards comes in at number 3, 17%, followed by former Timberwolves Zach LaVine at 4, 13%. Ja Morant to the Grizzlies at 10%. Other players mentioned Amadou Diallo, LeBron James, Derrick Jones Jr., Ben Simmons. By the way, crazy that LeBron is still on this list as the most athletic. And I guess if we're it depends on how you take this, right? It depends on, because I'd be willing to bet that Anthony Edwards has a greater vertical than Zion. It's just the fact that Zion's as athletic as he is, with the size that he is, the sheer size that Zion has. That's what makes it so impressive. And Giannis's length obviously plays into it. LeBron, because of how big he is, and even now, all the things he can do at his age and with the amount of wear and tear on him, is incredible. And there's other fringe rotation guys, well, not fringe rotation guys, but more role player guys like Diallo and Derrick Jones Jr. making this list. But Ant at number 3, if he has a big season, this is the type of thing where if he's in the news more, he's in the highlight reels more, and he genuinely improves his game yet again, he's probably number 1 on this list next year. That wouldn't shock me at all. And then the other category, which this is the most intriguing one, we'll save the best for last year, is which player is most likely to have a breakout season in 2021-22. This is another one that's really interesting. It really depends on how you define breakout season and how you define this question, right? It's a little bit like the comeback player of the year award. Is it a player the most improved player? Is most improved a player who went from not playing to getting a chance and playing really well, or a player who genuinely improved from, he got minutes and he wasn't great, and then he kept getting minutes and he kept getting better, right? How do you define that? Where do you draw that line? So the list here, Jaren Jackson Jr. of the Grizzlies is number 1 with 17%. And that makes sense. He was great 2 years ago in his second season in the league. Was really good as a rookie too. And then last year only played in 11 games. So it makes sense that he would break out this year healthy, playing with the healthy John Morant, an up and coming Grizzlies team. Number 2 is Anthony Edwards, 13% of the vote. This vote was split among, there's like almost like 16, 17 guys listed here. But Edwards is second with 13%. That means he probably got 4 or 5 of the 30 votes for breakout season. Michael Porter Jr. of the Denver Nuggets is third at 10%. Tied for fourth, there's a four-way tie with Darius Garland of the Cavs, Keldon Johnson of the Spurs, John Morant in Memphis, and Kevin Porter Jr. in Houston, all tied at 7%. Under the other players receiving votes, I'm not going to read them all because there's a bunch of them. Karl-Anthony Towns is listed, which means he probably got 1 vote. And so Zion Williamson, which I thought was interesting. So there's I'm going to ballpark this at 16 or 17 names on here for guys most likely to have a breakout season. Karl-Anthony Towns is the only one on this list that has made an All-NBA team. He's one of only 2 on here that's made an All-Star team along with Zion. And he's the only one that's made multiple All-Star teams. So it's interesting to me that, people there's a group of people out there who don't think Towns has had that breakout season because he had this quick peak when Butler was on the team is when they went to the playoffs and he got the recognition. He was all NBA. He was all-star for the first time. The following year, he made the all-star team, but he got hurt right around that time and has been out or I guess he didn't get hurt until the following year. But now the last 2 seasons has missed a ton of games due to injury and illness. There's still a breakout coming potentially for Karl-Anthony Towns. And basically what that means is if the Wolves make the playoffs, if he improves incrementally on the defensive end of the floor, he's already a superstar offensively. If this team becomes a playoff team, if they go to, say, the second round, he's going to be a consensus top 10 player instead of a consensus top 25. So you can certainly make the argument that Karl-Anthony Towns can still have a breakout season. And that's the thinking here. Is if he can truly put the team on his shoulders and show that defensive improvement and the consistency and stay on the court. Remember, his first 4 years, he missed 1 total game. And now the last 2 years, he's played in barely more than half of the Wolves games. Can he still have that breakout? And he's on this list with a bunch of really young players. Now, the flip side of this is Edwards is one of only 2 second-year players on this list. And of course, there's no rookies on this list. It's only Edwards and LaMelo Ball from last year's draft that are on this list. They're the only second-year guys. Everybody else is third year or older. And the idea that Ant obviously got more votes than LaMelo. LaMelo's under the also receiving votes, and Edwards is number 2 on this list. And to me, if I were going to, because I think, in my opinion, Towns has already broken out. It's just a matter of whether or not the team around him can figure this thing out, right? And obviously, Towns needs to improve defensively, but very rarely would one consider a defensive improvement and continued offensive excellence equaling a breakout individual season. But Anthony Edwards could go from, last December, January, he wasn't very good. He was not a good NBA player. He didn't get all the opportunities he should have been getting at the time. He was a bench guy, right? But then March, April, May, he was phenomenal. If he continues that over the course of the season, he played at an all-star level. He did in March, April, May of last year. If he does that again this season, that will be a breakout year, going from rookie of the year runner-up and number 1 overall pick, obviously, but rookie of the year runner-up to an all-star in year 2 for a team that breaks through from a 23-49 season, 5th worst record in the NBA to a playoff team this year. That equals a breakout season, and all the tools are there. And we saw in the preseason game, if the defensive urgency is there, if the improvement on the glass is there, and if the improvement on the outside shot, which continues to grow, the overall awareness and all that continues to gel for Anthony Edwards, then 100% absolutely he fits the category of a potential breakout season in 2021, 2022. And of course, team success is the reason why the Timberwolves haven't been on this list the last couple of years and now are finally getting back onto it. The lack of team success makes it really hard to highlight some of these individual achievements. And if they can just figure it out this year in terms of putting the whole thing together, then they'll be in much better shape on this survey next year, which obviously is the least of anyone's concerns right now. But it's always a really interesting barometer of how the league as a whole sees teams going into the season. And incidentally, the Wolves aren't mentioned at all in obviously they rank the top 4 teams in each conference, and there's 7 teams listed in the East and 8 that are mentioned in the West. Believe it or not, somebody had Portland at number 4 in the West. Actually, 2 people I think had Portland at number 4 in the West. The Wolves, of course, aren't mentioned there at all. And they're not mentioned in any of the MVP conversations, the starting a franchise today, any of those things. Best shooting guard, best small forward, best power forward, best center. Towns is not mentioned at all. Not shocking because of how talented the league is and the lack of team success last year. But this could look a lot different in a year if things come together as the Wolves believe that they will, and as I tend to think that they will this year as well. So later this week, I want to look at Chad Ford, our friend Chad Ford over at Chad Ford's NBA Big Board here at the Lockdown Network. He did an up-and-coming teams ranking of his own, which I think is fascinating. He's doing a top 25 players under 25. We talked about Anthony Edwards not making the 25 under 25 list at Fansided last week. I was up in arms about that. Chad Ford was a bit more generous to Ant, and I think has him ranked about right. So I want to compare more talk about Chad's list than compare, I guess, but talk about his list, compare it a little bit to the Fansided list we talked about last week. And that'll be on the show, probably Thursday's show. We'll do that. And then, of course, Friday, Wolves have their second preseason game of the preseason Friday evening. So all that's coming up here on the show. A reminder that you can follow this show anywhere you listen to podcasts. Of course, that includes Apple, Google, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. And also, thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Remember, free and available on all platforms, and that includes YouTube. This is, I think, week 6 of YouTube shows. So be sure that you're following, subscribed on there, like the episode you're watching now if you do enjoy it, and it definitely helps us get in front of more folks. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. That's all we have for you today here on the show. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.